So last but not least, we get to hear from Claire Baird. She's a core member, an organizer, and a trainer within the Catalyst Project. She's played a lead role in forging alliances between mostly white global justice and anti-war groups with immigrant-led economic and racial justice organizations. As a member of Catalyst, Claire serves on the National Committee of the War Resisters League, supporting counter-military recruitment organizing. Claire worked for many years with Not Bombs and was a participant in the Mission Anti-Displacement Coalition fighting against gentrification and for community power and community planning. Claire played a lead role in building relationships between Food Not Bombs and the Day Labor Program and the Coalition on Homelessness. Let's hear from Claire.
So, y'all ready to do some stacking functions and do some cheerleader style pyramids? No, well that'll be after the report back. So get ready. So Carla had asked me to talk a little bit about prefigurative politics and liberation permaculture and roles for white anti-racist organizers in that process. So I'm gonna do that, and then we'll do the pyramids. Prefigurative politics is kind of a different way of talking about liberation permaculture, and it's something that people talk about. You have a lot of different names for it. It gets talked about as like building the new world in the shell of the old, or what it means that we need to be both tearing down the systems that are oppressing us at the same time as really building up what's working, building up the institutions and the systems that we actually want to have. And that part of the way that we do that work is also the work itself. So that's something that we talked about a lot in the Permaculture for the People training, is that the way that we do the work and the practice of organizing together, that itself is the win. And whether we're building water catchment systems together or we're doing climate campaign policy work, that practice of learning how to do this work together in the way that we want to be together in this world that we're building is what we have to be doing at this moment while we're trying to take these things to scale, while we're trying to change these systems. And that those things have to be really intertwined. So if liberation permaculture is a way of designing our work that is intended to really be nurturing the visions and the values that we're trying to build out more into the world, then it is really about this how we do that work together, and thinking about how we don't control the systems, but we do control pockets of resistance. This is something that we also talked about a lot, and looking at how to both be growing those pockets, but right here where we're at now, how to make our communities and our work be reflecting the values that we're trying to spread in the world in a way that both these pockets of resistance are able to really nourish and sustain and grow resistance, but also that they're models for living that make more people demand that and see how this is actually how we want to be living and not be willing to compromise around that. So when that comes to the chunk of thinking about roles for white folks in that work, that's a work in progress that Catalyst Project and other folks are working on developing in collaboration with many of you all. I'm just going to say a couple things about thinking about internal decolonization as a way of kind of preparing the soil. This is something we did a lot of learning about in the course as well. It's just the importance of the soil and what that means for what we're trying to grow and build. Whether we're remediating it with mushrooms or amending it, returning the surplus. But just thinking about how, so for liberation permaculture and prefigurative politics, that if we're trying to build new structures and new ways of governing ourselves, it's not just about how those structures are set up, it's also what are we bringing into those as the people who make up those structures? How are we coming into that as whole people? What our beliefs and our actions and our values are? And what's the work that needs to happen for us to do that in the way we actually want to have it work? So thinking about how white supremacy and capitalism created the situation that we're in now, right? Like understanding how that's been so much of the source of what we're now dealing with and trying to remediate and shift, and how is also part of holding it up. And then for white folks, thinking about how we play part of the ongoing role of the ways that we internalize racism, bringing that into social movements that are trying to change that system, but then tearing those movements apart even while we're making small victories. So thinking about what's that process of undoing those same systems within ourselves in a way that we're actually able to be contributing to the kind of change we want to see. And thinking about how, one of the what was mentioned earlier before around what it means to tear people away from land and how that really laid the basis for imperialism and colonization around the world, what it means to separate people from the land that nourishes us on the spiritual, cultural, and physical levels, and how that part of the process also has to be undone. But there was something that Janan, who works with Jose, whose name was brought into the space earlier but couldn't be here tonight, said that really stuck with me about how we learn from the earth how to be interconnected. And so when we're so removed from that, it's really no wonder that our relationships with ourselves get so messed up with each other. So thinking about how do we remediate that? And so the need for white folks to be really doing the work that we need to do so that we're able to be agents for healing and justice and to be changing those patterns. And so for us in Catalyst, it's thinking about how we engage on the level of both action and beliefs and values, so that we're bringing those things more into alignment and more into harmony with whatever pieces of the organizing work we're involved in, how that can all be moving towards that common goal. And just thinking about how, thank you. We're super grateful to Movement Generation for the work that they have been doing for a while and are continuing to do in spaces like tonight, of making places where we're able to come together to sort through some of these bigger questions around different roles, and recognizing that that's going to be a long-term process. For us in Catalyst, we grapple with some of the bigger picture vision questions around in the transition that's already happening, where our communities and our organizations are trying to move that in the direction of justice and equity and healing. So what is that going to mean for communities that have race and class privilege? How are these communities going to fit into that bigger picture? And so some of that vision stuff is still really what we're like kind of in the thick of with you all, trying to figure out how those pieces work together. But what we do know is that we have to be doing that groundwork now, that work with the soil. And so for us, a lot of that is thinking about how in the political education work that we do, or in the organizing that we're involved in, whether that's around movements for immigrant justice or Gulf Coast reconstruction or demilitarization, how really all of that movement can be grounded in principles that are very permaculture-esque. And so for white folks specifically, thinking about how do we build up the anti-racist analysis that's going to help our communities orient towards that vision of justice, that's going to create that kind of flexibility and responsiveness and groundedness that means that then we're actively in support of self-determination for frontline communities that are leading this transition. How that can be happening on a material level in a way that we're really continuing the long-term work around decolonization, but not kind of waiting until we have everything perfect to also jump in there and like roll up our sleeves and be getting dirty together. Thinking about how we, through that process, because this is very much, prefigurative politics is really the making the road by walking kind of approach. So how in that process, we keep trying to untangle the ways that we internalize entitlement and superiority in ways that just keep that system going where there isn't equitable access to resources, because even within our social movements, we're not even able to make those shifts. So thinking about just how we can build a culture that's based on liberation permaculture principles around interdependence, being connected on these different levels.